Good morning. I know that I might be standing between you and your lunch and the sunshine. And I know I've only got 20 minutes to get through this, which may be a bit of a test for me. So hello, this is me. I'm Richard. Most people call me Rich. I've got the great privilege of being the Chief Exec at Solution Path. That said, I've got some other labels. I'm one of the co-founders. I also have some product responsibility. I contribute to the product direction and spend quite a bit of time talking about data, especially engagement analytics, in how we can use data to be a great enabler for students and staff at universities. But these labels don't define me, of course, although I think life has got a great habit of doing so. And some of these labels are: I was a soldier. I spent 15 years having taken the Queen's Shilling at a tender age of 16. I'm also a dad to 3 boys and a girl. 4 kids has definitely defined me in lots of ways. I used to play a bit of rugby in my time. I still like to train, and exercise has really helped me, mainly for the last label, which I'm going to share at the end. And the reasons why I'm telling you this is because I really don't believe in labels. But the terrible thing about data, which is the basis of the session, is that it has a habit of attributing labels. They classify things by their very definition, but we'll revisit the paradox at the end. So thanks for joining me. Hopefully this session is be informative and maybe even a little bit enlightening. So I know there's been a number of sessions, not least all the previous one, about the utilisation of data in support of wellbeing. I'm cautious about doing any kind of one-upmanship around the different approaches, but obviously each approach has got different merits. I've approached this through the lens of an ability to mobilise the data that you already have available to you today, so simply and easily at scale across the whole university. So from a technology perspective, I want to keep it quite straightforward. I'm happy to explore those aspects of the tech at the end if time allows, and obviously at your convenience. So in the session, there's kind of 4 key themes. Why engagement is an important measure in whatever context, so blended, physical, or indeed online. How the use of engagement data to gain a better understanding of learner behaviours supports lots of different agendas like wellbeing. How disengagement can be used as an early warning indicator for struggling or at-risk students who need support early in their problem cycles, and why transparency is a key strength to kind of strengthen relationships between students and tutors, and the supporting services, and how data can kind of augment a constructive conversation. So I do think it's important to qualify that we didn't set out to address a mental health challenge. I think there's lots of tools that are available that focused on health and wellbeing. So it would be disingenuous for me to say that this has been an experience that we've gained from working with engagement monitoring technology to identify emerging issues, so including wellbeing. So engagement analytics for us wasn't necessarily kind of this eureka moment in the bath, but it warrants a review of the heritage really and how we got involved. So we were seeking to understand kind of learner behaviours on what we've learned in the 7, nearly 8 years that whilst we've been collaborating with the sector. So in the summer of 2012, the What Works final report was published. This was a report that was set out to challenge the sector, as these kind of reports often do. But the findings in the report are as relevant today, I think, as they were then, and potentially even more so with the pandemic. The report sought to highlight how a student's sense of belonging was the crucial factor to student persistence and their future success, finding friends, feeling confident, and above all, kind of feeling part of their course and their institution. So the report summarised the findings of several years worth of work from 22 institutions across 7 different projects, with the findings showing that experiences for students were remarkably consistent. Our original work was in collaboration with our academic partner, Nottingham Trent University, who were one of the key contributors to the HERE and the What Works projects, and who co-curated the engagement analytics tool with. They call it the student dashboard, putting the student at the centre of what they do. By doing this, it creates a hub where the institution can centralise, personalise and interpret its understanding of students with their available data, and then wrap its services and support holistically around them. Their original business sponsor used to say, every conversation starts with the dashboard. This is, of course, key, because one significant statement by Vincent Tinto that stuck with me in the report said that access without support is not opportunity. emphasising the obligation for institutions to take a broad responsibility of all student needs, and more importantly, for those non-traditional students, support does not end, but starts at the point where they enter university. So supporting the student holistically across all the dimensions, behavioural, emotional and cognitively, it supports the thinking that engagement is beyond the confines of the academic module, and how student engagement is not just a consideration of academic practice, but as an institutional strategy that scaffolds the student. So the student sense of belonging is to the module, course and university was the key finding from the report. And it was this that helped students to persist and ultimately succeed. So the need for a student to feel part of the process and not something superficial, something that we've been acutely difficult during this last year. So this led us at Solution Path to seek out ways to evidence their participation using data. So as highlighted in the report, the academic sphere is the most important place for it to be nurtured, which is where we started. So the report conclusions all point towards high quality student-centered learning and teaching with appropriate support, of course, as the primary focus to engender this student sense of belonging. So the idea of a sense of belonging meant we had many questions, some about what makes a student succeed, their route in, traditional A-level or BTEC routes, a mature student with kind of industry experience, the institution's overall status and their focus on successful transition, the quality of their programme of study, or indeed kind of the social capital that they arrive with. We also asked why students persisted, again, a long and varied list of influencing factors. There's lots of labels, apologies. There's lots of labels and attributes, lots of environmental and institutional factors that again all matter and all contribute, but these important influential factors are just contributors. The causal trigger for a student's non-persistence is complex, and when looking through a data lens, codifying all these would mean kind of an endless data science endeavor. So how is one thing more important than another, and then at what time? The reality is that all factors are wholly contextual and extremely fluid. We therefore sought out what's common against all students, which is, of course, the university learning environment. All students participate to one degree or another. They participate in virtual, physical activities, whether kind of scheduled events such as lectures, labs, or tutorials, and they conduct independent learning activities or collaborate with their peers. These all generate signals in the modern learning hubs that are universities. So collecting the data from all of these data streams identifies those participation events that we can use to understand how students are engaging in their study. And whilst they may only be proxies, we can create meaning and meaningful actions from the data, as whilst each EdTech vendor has their own view of what engagement with their technology is and means for the learner. We know that success is different in very different contexts. Success for one student may be something very different than for another. So making sense of all of these interactions and creating an objective measure is what we can achieve then with the engagement analytics. So whatever the participation event, these click streams can be collected and codified. We can create the meaning by transforming these events through weighting them differently based on the programme of study, the outcomes, or simply coding what is a normal pattern of student behaviour at the university. So learners that are on agricultural programmes, for example, will have a very different study pattern to those that are on business courses. So engagement analytics supports the understanding of different learning behaviours, simplifies it into categories, which allows any user, whether the student or a member of staff, to understand and, more importantly, take action. So turning this clickstream of data into something of meaning. So by creating a distribution of engagement, a new understanding can be reached, which supports the many different stakeholders, staff and students alike. So in this visualization, it represents an indicative distribution of engagement in a university where the average student makes up the majority of the middle, with intervals across the different groups. So consistently in our work, we've been able to empirically evidence that those that sit in the high categories are twice as likely to progress and at higher awards, so specifically 2-1 or above, whereas 95% of those that sit in the high risk groups withdraw or fail in their studies. So this is at a macro level too, right? So in the most recent times, we've been seeing this kind of predictive capability to be increasingly more accurate and can be tuned to those different cohort groups where learning behaviours are very different, such as online only or nurses and teachers who may spend time out on placement. So by distributing across these engagement categories, it allows you to create different campaigns with different cohorts of students and for different stakeholder groups. So whether it's a focus on care leavers or widening participation groups, targeted precision outreach can be achieved by using these kind of category groupings. So as a universal metric, this common objective classification supports all aspects of university life. So engagement analytics offers the university a really unsullied objective measure, removing any subjective views on the behaviour of a student. By muting a predictive grade approach often seen in the sector, you remove the idea that there's some sort of inevitability with someone, which can have an undesired effect of kind of writing them off. Does a student give up does a tutor give up on a student because of their familial heritage? And more importantly, by showing a predicted grade, it doesn't allow you to share this with your students, at least not without consequence. So, however, by sharing engagement data with your students, you can take control of their own learning and make their own choices about their change, and they can make those changes immediately. So engendering this idea of positivity towards the good behaviours that lead to successful outcomes. So feedback is an important factor in building student understanding and potentially their own self-worth. So what's more is data from any system can be used for engagement monitoring, not just the academic context, but across this kind of fragmenting and ever-changing landscape as learning models are flipped from traditional class-based lectures to flexible and asynchronous type participation. This creates a means to support the many different agendas, whether the tutor or the academic community who are seeking to push their students into higher engagement categories ahead of assessment, or student support services who are trying to identify those at risk of early student withdrawal, or indeed wellbeing services that are seeking out the emerging issues as students disengage from university life for lots of reasons, not just academic ones. So I've brought together a couple of operational examples of how engagement data can be used. It's not an exhaustive list, but these kind of specific examples I hope kind of help your understanding a little. So UWE, I think, were one of the first institutions to look at data in this way. Their decision to enhance their predominantly reactive support service into a more proactive service. They launched Stream, our product, obviously, in 2018, specifically to support their mental wealth agenda. So Steve West, the VC there, is a long-time advocate of change and understanding how universities need to respond to the challenges of mental health that is only growing, as we know. So acknowledging that these challenges are ever increasing, which has seen them kind of respond quite robustly during the pandemic. So UWE not just kind of sitting back and waiting for students to get in touch when they need help. They're actively expanding wellbeing support, proactively reaching out and innovating their offer by finding new ways to connect with their students. And one of these ways is UWE is by tracking their students' engagement and responding to those that are not. So whilst engagement analytics supports academic practice, the drive has been the empowerment of their support services. Similarly, as we'll hear from, I think, Cara from Keele later on this afternoon, they're embarking on an OFS Challenge Fund project with a whole university approach, seeking to get ahead of those emerging problems using the data. So what I wanted to conclude this slide with, though, is a comment from an NTU student. This was during a BBC One World at One interview from a couple of years ago. And it was exploring the challenge of mental health in the sector. They interviewed several students about their experiences of the NTU student dashboard, and a business management student was reflecting on the challenges of being away from home and how her anxiety had emerged. And she was able to pinpoint this change in her dashboard. This no doubt supports that one student's understanding of themselves, but she went on to say that she felt that the dashboard was indeed a necessity in the modern world of learning. So NTU is our co-creation partner of our engagement analytics. They represent quite a significant contributor to our understanding of the application of data in higher education. And they've got a wealth of knowledge about how data can support learners in lots of different contexts. But I wanted to focus specifically around the student experience. I think the student experience is quite a broad church, but ultimately it's about how a student perceives their interactions with the university. No student experience is the same as no student is the same. So engagement analytics codifies the learner experience, showing how a student is interacting across all of the services, whether academic or otherwise, that the university offers. The academic endeavour is this kind of co-creation activity. Their engagement analytic resource was implemented not only to aid students who were struggling, but to support the student experience overall. So one of those key areas of focus for them was how data could be used in those student-tutor interactions. So not only does the analytics support early identification of struggling students, but any conversation can be enriched with the data that's on hand. So those discussions are only improved by the quality of the interventions that take place that are informed by them. So one key aspect is the ability to kind of share the engagement data with the student themselves, supporting the student's own kind of empowerment of their learning, comparing their own activity with their peers and supporting some sort of self-regulation and aiding in the goal setting and planning. So students, especially in their first year, may struggle to understand the importance of what learning success means beyond simple attendance to lectures. So gaining feedback reinforces their positive views of learning, even when they're struggling. So one anecdotal example that I was given was that of the worried well, where many students start seeking out interactions with staff to test where they are in their learning, because assessments may not be frequent. So reviewing their engagement data grounds them and removes some of this emotional doubt generated from the absence of feedback. So engagement is processed daily, giving them a near real-time kind of Fitbit experience of their participation. So as I covered in the previous slide, supporting the student holistically is an important part of a student's sense of belonging. Students disengage for lots of reasons, not just academic ones. So Sarah Baldwin, who's the head of academic support at NTU, talked in the same BBC World at One feature from that last slide, and she talked about how poor engagement is often an indicator to a deeper problem. And whilst they help students to interpret that low mood is normal, she said that if it was a barrier to life and learning, they can help proactively. So again, I wanted to conclude this slide with another NTU student statement. This formed part of the submission to the recent OFS Gravity Assist report that was looking at the use of technology, especially considering the pandemic. So you can see from the sentiment here that data-powered outreach has given this one student a sense of being part of the university, even under some quite difficult circumstances of the pandemic. So historically, the first opportunity that a university can act is often at first assessment, other than maybe a subjective view of how a student is doing by a conscientious academic. So this had proven to be even harder as the student interactions have been 100% online. So this means that often well into the academic term before a student is identified as at risk. So if a student fails a test, then in theory, they're already behind, right? They're in the recovery room attempting to address a deficit as well as continue in their learning, and now they need to catch up, creating more anxiety and more pressure. So this ratcheting, as you can well imagine, creates a huge challenge for students. There have been lots of evidence from our community that those who struggle at the beginning continues to struggle right throughout their time at university, and those that present with mental health challenges don't progress as well as their peers. So getting ahead of these issues then has been the focus for us, and we see it as a focus for every institution. So in this slide, I wanted to show you how you get ahead. We've talked about engagement very much at a macro level. So here we'll see kind of data from an individual students at a micro level. So these are real student engagement profiles from students from within this year. I'm going to show you 3 examples. The first is a student that remains enrolled. You can see that engagement kind of builds over the start of the course in October. You've got a dip over the academic break at Christmas, and then a return to normal in the new year. this is because engagement reflects their participation. And whilst this student packed their bags and switched off from learning completely, they've returned to study and re-engaged in their new term. In the second scenario, we can see a student that's still enrolled in their studies, but clearly behaving very differently to the student above. Their engagement profile indicates them as being at high risk of withdrawal, probably doing the very minimum, attending the virtual seminar, but not doing all of the elements that support the student building the habits they need to get an award. And finally, a student that withdrew in early February, and we can see that they failed to connect with their course in any meaningful way. So whilst these are just signals in the data, codifying their engagement is allowing us to see problem cycles emerging. And this allows staff to take proactive steps to intervene and change that learning trajectory. So data transparency. So whether unconsciously or not, bias exists. So whether in the example of where a tutor may subjectively write off a student because they came in via a BTEC route, or using labels like polar quintiles, these classifications can inadvertently omit other students from different types of outreach. So subjective views exist. So programmatic interventions based on preconceived view about a label will create unnecessary noise by reaching out to those that don't need help, or more importantly, miss a student in need. I think the best intentions could be diverted. So student well-being is one such example, right? Where there's no labels that indicate whether a student may have a propensity to anxiety. White middle-class men may have a higher risk group for some dire outcomes, but mental health can be and does affect anyone. So students cannot change their route to university nor their heritage. So creating algorithms that kind of perpetuate some sort of taxing of students because of these attributes potentially, perpetuates bias, marginalizes and diverts and focus. So how a student chooses to engage, measuring what they do, not who they are, means that it's data that can be shared and they can change their own behaviors. So engagement as a measure of the learning environment supports the change of systems and practice, allowing universities to test new ideas and to see how a student responds. So this creates an equitable playing field where students and their sense of and their learning experiences are shared across the entire university, and with them as their own agents of change. So I just want to cover off then this last label then. So I joined the army at 16 because I was told I wasn't academic. What it actually meant was that learning environment was not suitable for my learning. I struggled to stay engaged. Lots of it was reading copy, and it was quite frankly quite boring. The problem with labels is it carries with it some assumptions. So if I went to university today, I would have been identified as a student who was quite privileged in today's world. Both my parents had higher awards. My sister was already at university, but at the time, my labels weren't indeed known to me or anyone else. And it's only through my children that I've now know what those labels are, right? So at school, I couldn't engage, at least not in English. I absolutely smashed physics, science, art, and physical education. Turns out I'm a little bit neurodiverse, which has proven to be a bit of a barrier to learning, but something that I was able to navigate and turn into a positive. So I hope we can show that data has an important place in higher education landscape, and engagement analytics supports the many current and pressing agendas. However, data shouldn't not be a label, but done right can be a powerful objective driver at an institutional level, a cohort, and more importantly, at an individual personal level that supports that change. So I used to have one of these kind of Leatherman multi-tools in the army. I took it everywhere with me because it was kind of supporting me doing lots of different things. And I think I like an engagement analytics to kind of this multi-tool for education. So thank you. I appreciate you giving me the 20 minutes, and hopefully I was able to get through that without too many errors. Okay, good to talk.